Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and a topic came up earlier in my comments. I had someone ask me, Jason, it seems like you don't really do rows anymore. You used to do a lot of rows. You program rows for novices, but you do pull-ups as your main upper body exercise as far as your upper back and everything goes, as far as your main upper body pull. And yeah, that's absolutely true. And that's something I should probably talk about as to why I still favor the Pendlay row, the row off the floor for novice lifters, even though myself, you don't see me do them, right? I don't do them anymore. I occasionally work them back in for short periods of time, but usually for no more than 2 or 3 weeks at a time, right? And then I rotate them back out and I go back to just more pull-ups, chin-ups. And I've gravitated more towards the dead hang pull-up as I've gotten older. And I generally feel that the pull-up is an all-around more useful exercise. But I do have some old Pendlay row footage back from when I was training at a gym here, so that people can get an idea of what the exercise looks like for novices and things. But I'm going to work that in with some of my recent pull-ups. And there's a reason I program this for novices. And it's not because it's better necessarily for back development. I honestly feel that a combination of pull-ups and deadlifts actually can build your entire back top to bottom, particularly if you're doing other big exercises. You're doing back squats or front squats and overhead pressing and all that stuff. And particularly you guys who are doing cleans and things. Oh yeah, you don't necessarily need rows. And if anything, there can be fatigue issues. That's something that I've heard Dennis, who's freaked 0550, I've heard him say, and I've noticed the same thing in my training, that rows will interfere with your deadlift volume. They'll absolutely interfere with your deadlift volume. And it's not that they're not a great exercise. In fact, they're ideal for beginners because most novice lifters really are not strong enough to program weighted pull-ups. They really aren't. I mean, if I have a novice who, if I was going to work with someone and they could crank out 5+ dead hang pull-ups from their first day in the gym, I would program them with pull-ups from day one. Yeah, I'd go ahead and do that, right? Because they can do the exercise. But how common is that? It's not common. So when I'm writing a lot of cookie cutter programs, like if I'm going to write a novice program, and maybe even sometimes like my intermediate, my linear periodization intermediate has rows in there, right? Now, I would say someone could swap those rows for pull-ups if they're strong enough to do 12 pull-ups, right? That's the key. If you're strong enough to do 12 pull-ups, which not all intermediates are, that's kind of the point we come to with that program too, is because that's for a variety of different people, including football players and stuff could run that program in their off season. You see the problem there. A lot of them, they're too fat. They're too fat to do 12 pull-ups. So that program's not going to work for them. So you've got to use rows. So ultimately what that comes down to is that the novice lifter isn't strong enough to do pull-ups and they're not strong on the deadlift, right? We don't ever write, for novice or first year lifters, you don't ever write high volume deadlift programs. So they're not strong enough on the rows or the deadlifts to really fatigue their lower back that much. And the rows themselves will build their deadlift. In other words, if I take a novice lifter and I have them do 10 to 15 sets of squats every week and 10 to 15 sets of barbell rows, like Pendlay rows off the floor every week, what's going to happen to their deadlift? They're going to build their deadlift without ever even doing it. So it's kind of funny, people will say, how come you only have people, deadlift once every 4 or 5 days on your novice program and they only do one real set? Because that's enough. You're just training the motor pattern and you're getting a little more hamstring work and things like that. That's all you're doing. You're not really putting size on them with that. It's there just to learn the deadlift for later, and maybe it might be adding a little bit of hamstring. They're probably getting a little hamstring development out of it. They're not building their back. Those rows are building their back. And their deadlift goes up automatically, right? If you were to take that same novice and only have him do the deadlift once every 2 weeks, once every 3 weeks, let's say 3 weeks, because you'll detrain a movement pattern in 3 weeks. And he's still progressing on the Pendlay row and he's progressing on the squat. What's going to happen when you have him walk in a deadlift? Even if he hasn't touched a deadlift in 3 weeks, his deadlift's going to go up by 10 pounds. Right? If his squat has gone up 10 to 15 pounds in that 3 weeks, and it should, and his rows have gone up 5 to 10 pounds, I guarantee you his deadlift's going up at least 10 pounds. It might go up 20. without having done the exercise in 3 weeks. And even then, if you only did one set. So all we're really doing is just training the movement pattern for them, because they can build their deadlift with those other lifts. And those other lifts, they're going to be easier to program for the novice, because they can't handle deadlift volume. They can't. I've noticed that over the years, guys like Ripito have. I would say people don't need to be doing any sort of deadlift volume until they're an intermediate, right? When you've built a respectable deadlift, like when you can deadlift 405, so 4 plates aside for 4 or 5 reps, right? When you can do that, then we can probably benefit from higher volumes of deadlifting. Also, when you can do that, your lower back and everything else is going to be more subject to fatigue. And so you're going to get more fatigue effect from the Pendlay rows when you're doing higher volumes of deadlifting. Now, it's perfectly fine if you rotate a novice back, or even an intermediate back to a fairly low deadlift volume, they can handle rows just fine. They can handle rows just fine. But what happens when you want to do more deadlift volume? What happens if you want to have someone deadlift twice a week? You know, we're getting all the lower body work we need. Or let's say, you know, you do something like what I'm going to be working on coming up and everything here. Let's say I'm going to be squatting twice a week and doing hip thrusts and stuff twice a week, and then deadlift twice a week. I'm not going to have the recovery to do rows, but I can do my pull-ups. The pull-ups are going to work the upper body more effectively. They do. They're a better upper body builder. You're going to build more lat, more bicep, all of that. Now, we could argue about potentially traps. Probably build a little more trapezius with a row. It's going to help with a little bit of spinal erector and things like that, a little more. But in terms of overall size on the upper body, that dead hang pull-up is tough to beat. It's just flat out a superior upper body exercise. But the row is a full body movement. Pendlay row is a full body movement, and it transfers over to your deadlift. So because we can't beat the novice up because of all these other lifts they're doing with a lot of deadlift volume, and we have a bit of recovery to spare there, we use the row. Use the row. It's a more fatigue manageable exercise. We can handle their fatigue management versus their workload and hypertrophy stimulus more with a row than we can with a deadlift for a novice lifter. And like I said, since they're not strong enough to do the pull-ups yet, and the row will build their pull-ups. And that's the beauty of it. You know, it's an exercise that you can have someone do from day one. You can teach a Pendlay row to the weakest novice in the world if you have the lightest plates and a light enough bar, right? You can take someone who is ridiculously weak, and we can program the Pendlay row from day one. You can teach them to do the Pendlay row from day one. It will build their pull-up. It'll build their pull-up. It will build their deadlift. So we can use it as an easily programmable, teachable tool that has good fatigue management. Use it to build their pull-up and their deadlift, and then later, once they're a more advanced lifter, you know, when they're at a point where, like I said, someone can deadlift 405 for reps, they can Pendlay row 225, or, you know, it's about 100 kilos for those of you who don't use our system of measurement, about 100 kilos, about 180 kilos on the deadlift. When you can rep those two things, we can probably cut rows out at that point. We can take you over to a pull-up or a chin-up, and you can use that now to build your upper back more effectively, and then we can go ahead and add more deadlifting in. But like I said, that by that same token, if you have periods of time to where you need to work on other things and you can't do much deadlift volume, the row can be swapped back in for the same reason, one of the same reasons I have a novice do it, right? You can swap it back in. So it's just a matter of what you're doing in your training. But I mean, for the novice lifter, and people are like, if you think the pull-up is so great, why don't you have them do it? Because most of them can't. And I can get more total full body benefit and more carryover for them with a row than I can with them doing reverse band assist pull-ups. Right? I can go ahead and make their upper and lower body strong. We can increase multiple lifts with an exercise they can do from day one. It's better for the novice. We get more total training effect. And like I said, once they're strong enough to do real pull-ups, you know, once they're strong enough that I can hang a 10-pound plate off of them and they can do 5 pull-ups, all right, now we've got something. Then we can work with pull-ups. That is now a programmable exercise for them, and we can get the real benefits from it. But you just can't do that as easily, at least not across the board with novices. There's some that you can, but you need to remember they're the exception to the rule, not the norm. All All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.